The return to Seattle for the UFC for the first time since 2013 did not disappoint, as it was a stacked fight night card with incredible fights, big time finishes, high stakes in many of these fights as well. But unfortunately, there's going to be a gray cloud that hovers over it because of the ending to the main event in what was a very important spot for the UFC's bantamweight division, as we saw the number 7 ranked former 2-weight world champion Henry Cejudo back for the first time since last February to take on Song Yadong, number 7 versus number 8, a fight where both men were looking to not lose more consecutive bouts and to continue to climb the ranks and inch closer to a title in this stacked division. And while we saw 3 rounds of high pressure, high octane, high volume action, very back and forth, very high level stuff, it ends via technical decision at the end of the 3rd round, beginning of the 4th round. We did not get to see the championship rounds of this fight, and that is because of an accidental eye poke from Song Yadong given to Henry Cejudo that altered his vision bad enough to where he could no longer continue the fight. So as I kind of lay out what happened and what transpired in that 3rd round, I'm going to show a thread on the screen from Aaron Bronsteter, who in my opinion is one of the absolute best MMA journalists that there is in the space today. He is very educated and informed on all of the small nuances of the game in terms of judging criteria, referee criteria, and everything in between. So I'm going to flash this up and scroll it as I just kind of give the Cliff Notes version of what happened in the cage, while this tweet thread will kind of show you the more in-depth what exactly happened, what was going through Jason Herzog's head during the time. So first and foremost, just going into that 3rd round, there were moments for both guys where there were penalties. If I'm not mistaken, there was either an eye poke or a groin strike on the side of Henry Cejudo given to Song Yadong, and then the same for Song Yadong given to Henry Cejudo. I believe it was a groin strike, and then of course the eye poke happened in round 3. Once the eye poke happened, we had the traditional halt in action that would give Henry Cejudo time to recover, put the cold compress on his eye, wipe it out, so on and so forth, to where we could return to action safely. And being the veteran that Henry is, he took the full 5-minute intermission to make sure he could see to the best of his ability in order to get back into the fight and continue on in what was going to be the championship rounds 4 and 5. And this happened with, I believe, a little bit over 1 minute remaining in that 3rd round. So once the fight restarted, they had to finish out that round 3, that final minute, where nothing big would happen in terms of moments, but Song Yadong would continue to go on the offense. He really wanted to pressure forward and make Henry Cejudo pay, I guess you could say, quote unquote, for that 5-minute break in the action. But again, no big moments. We go to the end of the 3rd, both fighters go to their stools, but that is when we hear Henry Cejudo screaming,
"I can't see, man. He's blurry, dude."
So Herzog brings the doctor in once again to check on Henry, and that is when they decide to waive off the fight. However, being that Henry Cejudo decided to finish out that 3rd round and say that he could continue, that led to the point where we were over halfway through the bout, meaning that if the fight were to be stopped between rounds moving forward, the fight would be scored at that point from what had happened. So there were 3 full rounds of action to score, essentially 3 full 5-minute rounds. And so on the scorecards, Song Yadong was up 2-1 on 2 judges' scorecards and 3-0 on another, so he essentially would have won a traditional 3-round unanimous decision, but since this was supposed to be a 5-round fight and we didn't see the latter 2 rounds, it is a technical decision. And since there were no points deducted, the scorecards were not hindered. However, if a point would have been deducted for Song Yadong, then those 2 scorecards that had it 2-1 for Song would have turned into 28-28 ties, meaning we would have had a majority draw instead of a decision victory for Song Yadong. And it sucks for Henry as well because it is a loss at the end of the day rather than being stopped in the middle of that 3rd round, being that he couldn't continue and being ruled a no contest instead. So that's kind of me putting it all together as well as I could, trying to recall everything while you were seeing the official terminology from Aaron Bronsteter on the screen. Regardless, drama was involved, and drama surrounds the aftermath of what otherwise was a very fun, very high-level back-and-forth affair in the UFC Seattle main event. event between Cejudo and Yadong. And obviously, as I said, it sucks for Henry. He gets a loss on his record. That's now 3 in a row since returning from retirement. But it sucks for Song Yadong because this turns what was a great performance by him into a very cloudy, kind of people turning against him type of victory instead. But he was quick to take accountability in the aftermath, apologize for the eye poke, and obviously called to even have a rematch with Henry Cejudo, where later in the post-fight presser, Dana White would shoot that down. So it's hard to kind of go any further in terms of what's next for both of these guys, especially for Henry. As I say, 3 losses in a row. Both guys want to run it back. Dana White doesn't want to run it back. Song Yadong has won 3 of his last 4 fights now, with the only loss coming to Petr Yan in 2024. And all of this just brings me back to the point of not helping but wondering what could have happened with Henry had he not retired back in May of 2020 after finishing Dominick Cruz. But that is just a what-if question that we unfortunately will never be able to answer. And for Song Yadong, being that he is only 27 years old, already has an 11-3 record in the UFC with 1 draw. That's quite the resume that he's put together at such a young age. Victories over Cejudo, Chris Gutierrez, Ricky Simón, Marlon Moraes, Marlon Chito Vera. He's a very elite fighter and still not even in his prime yet, and he showed that he continues to evolve fight by fight. He was able to fend off most offense from Henry Cejudo. Yes, of course, 2 judges had it 2-1, giving Henry one of those rounds. 1 judge gave Henry Cejudo the 2nd round, 1 judge gave Henry Cejudo the 3rd round, and then we had the 1 judge that had Song Yadong up 3-0. So if we take Dana White's word for it and don't get the rematch between Song Yadong and Henry Cejudo, what could be next for both gentlemen? Well, for Henry, I'm honestly not quite sure. Maybe a fight with someone like Rob Font, who also fought on this card. It kind of just depends on where Henry's headspace is in the aftermath of this fight. 3 fights in a row that he's lost, 38 years old, he's not getting any younger. He still looked very good, elusive, fast, and technical, but time is clearly not on his side. And for Song Yadong, I think it's pretty easy to actually matchmake for him, assuming we don't get the rematch here against Henry Cejudo. You putting up against the guy that just challenged for the title and lost the first fight of his professional career, Umar Nurmagomedov. It would be number 3 versus number 8, maybe number 7 come Tuesday morning if the rankings decide to adjust Henry and Song Yadong, even though the controversy surrounds their main event. But regardless, that fight makes all the sense in the world. We know that neither of them are going to get a title shot from their last fights. Umar obviously lost in a title bout. Song Yadong lost in 2024, so he's just now won this fight, not on any win streak at the moment. Corey Sandhagen at number 4 versus Davison Figueiredo at number 5 is scheduled to take place May 3rd, so those 2 are booked up. The only 2 other people ahead of Song Yadong that would be fresh matchups are Sean O'Malley and Petr Yan, but they are pretty much both up in the air for a potential title fight with Merab Dvalishvili, according to Dana White in the post-fight press conference. So with all of them being booked and busy, or potentially about to be booked and busy, it has to be Umar Nurmagomedov, Song Yadong, a main event or a featured bout on a pay-per-view card. That is a very good fight that holds high stakes, title implications. Umar looking to bounce back from his first ever loss. Song Yadong looking to make it 2 wins in a row, put this controversy to bed, and get a convincing win or finish over Umar. It's high level, 2 guys that are great in the striking, but pretty much well versed in all areas, especially for Umar Nurmagomedov. I don't see anything wrong with booking that fight next. As a matter of fact, if I'm the UFC, I'm going into the war room on Tuesday morning and making that fight as quickly as possible for a potentially late springtime, early summer turnaround. But I want to hear what you all thought about this fight specifically, how it ended, in the comments below. What do you think this means for the future of Henry Cejudo's career? Where does it take Song Yadong next? Is it against Umar Nurmagomedov, or would you pair him up with someone differently? Give me all of your thoughts below. And now that we are done with the main event discussion and drama, let's get into the rest of the card because there is a lot of big heavy hitters to touch on here. Although this fight wasn't the main event of the evening, the middleweight marathon for February of 2024 did, however, continue on at UFC Seattle, because in the co-main event, we saw the number 9 ranked Brendan Allen take on the number 12 ranked Anthony Fluffy Hernandez in a rematch over 7 years in the making. They first met back at LFA 32 in 2018, where Anthony Fluffy Hernandez got a 5-round decision victory over Brendan. Here they meet all these years later, all of the fights later. Both guys have went on huge win streaks in the UFC. Brendan was on a 7-fight streak before losing that at the end of 2024, and Anthony Fluffy Hernandez entering this fight was on a 6-fight win streak. And this pretty much was everything we could have thought it was going to be and then some, because these two grapplers went at it for 15 straight minutes. So many submission threats, so many transitions, reversals, everything that you can imagine from a grappling match is what we saw here over the course of a 3-round fight. It was 1-1 heading into the 3rd round, where I had put out on X that the winner of this had to prove who had more dog in them. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not sure if there's anyone in this middleweight division that can outdog Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, as he gets the 29-28 unanimous decision victory across the board, makes his win streak 7 in a row. He's 2-0 against Brendan Allen. 5 of the 7 victories on this win streak are by way of stoppage. He is now going to be a top 10 middleweight come Tuesday morning. He just never gets tired. He never stops pressing forward. Brendan Allen definitely was the sharper fighter on the feet, landed the bigger strikes. However, he was really antsy to get in and try and threaten with submissions, and that turned out to be the detriment in many moments of this fight for him. And in that 3rd round, Brendan Allen just had nothing left to give, as Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, as he typically does, wilts his opponents under his pressure and sucks the life out of them, where they have nothing else to give, and takes them as close to the brink of quitting as they can get. And while he didn't finish Brendan, it was a very convincing decision victory, because in that 3rd round, it was all Anthony Hernandez. Unlike rounds 1 and 2, where obviously Brendan had won one of those rounds and had moments in the round that he lost, this one, in that 3rd and final round, there were no moments for Brendan. It was all Fluffy. He left no doubt. And so what does that mean for him? 7 wins in a row, a top 10 middleweight ranking next to his name on Tuesday morning, and all of the other moving puzzle pieces right now at 185 pounds. Nassourdine Imavov knocked out Israel Adesanya 3 weeks ago. Dricus du Plessis defended his title against Sean Strickland 2 weeks ago. Jared Cannonier halted the momentum of Gregory Rodriguez last week and held his spot in the top 10 of 185. So for the 4th consecutive week, I want you to tell me, how do you pair all of these pieces together in this middleweight division? One thing seems certain, and that is that Khamzat Chimaev is likely going to be challenging Dricus du Plessis for the next middleweight title shot. One tier down from that, not as certain, but a fight that I feel like does make a lot of sense and is likely to happen next, is Nassourdine Imavov versus Caio Borralho in a number 1 contender bout, even though in my personal opinion, Nassourdine Imavov has done everything that can be asked of him and then some. 4 top 10 victories in a row, including a finish over a former 2-time champion. To me, this guy shouldn't have to fight anymore at all. But if he does, I would like to see it be against Caio Borralho, who is undefeated in the UFC so far, most recently a huge war that he had with Jared Cannonier in the end of 2024, where he got the victory in one of the best fights of the year. And then we know that next month, March 15th or something like that, if my dates are all correct, Marvin Vettori is having a rematch with Roman Dolidze. That's number 8 versus number 10. So let's just assume that Khamzat Chimaev is next for Dricus. Let's assume Caio Borralho is going to fight Nassourdine Imavov. We know that Roman Dolidze and Marvin Vettori are going to fight. Then that does leave a couple of names for Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, and the one that screams at me the loudest and that intrigues me the most is Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, number 9, at least assuming that's where he'll be Tuesday morning, against the number 5 ranked former champion, Robert the Reaper Whittaker. That's a tale as old as time. The striker versus the grappler, the man with all the experience and accolades in Robert Whittaker versus the man that is surging and has all the momentum present day in Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. That checks every box for me as a fight fan. Make it a 5-round main event. Make it a featured bout on a UFC pay-per-view. Put it in the parking lot at the UFC Apex for all I care. That is what I want to see next, assuming all of those other things happen that we touched on beforehand. Fluffy versus the Reaper. Oh, man, the conflicts of interest are heavy in that one. In the featured bout of the evening, we saw Rob Font stay on the UFC Seattle card, as we know that heading into this, he was supposed to be the main event against Dominic Cruz in what was going to be Cruz's retirement fight. We know that Cruz suffered a second shoulder injury in the last 8 months. That forced him to retire early before having his swan song fight. Rob Font chose to stay on the card. The UFC gave him a short notice replacement, but it was no walk in the park. They gave him the 25-year-old undefeated John Matsumoto. This fight would take place at 140-pound catch weight due to the short notice aspect of the fight, and these two went at it for 15 straight minutes, and Rob Font gets his hand raised via split decision, 29-28 times 2, 28-29 in favor of Gian Matsumoto. And this fight came down to the boxing of Rob Font, which is no surprise. That is what he's been known for years and years now, and the grappling and takedowns of Gian Matsumoto. Unfortunately for Matsumoto, he wasn't able to capitalize with all of the takedowns that he had success with. What did he have? 6, 7, 8 takedowns, something like that. But unfortunately, he did not do much with them, didn't get too much control time, didn't threaten with submissions, didn't get off any big ground and pound strikes. And while he did hold his all on the feet, Rob Font, especially as the fight went on and at big time in the third round, just continued to pull away and separate himself in terms of the numbers and the damage dealt. That damage included a nasty step-in elbow from Rob Font that would split open the forehead of Gian Matsumoto in that third round, and once the blood started trickling, Rob Font smelt that blood in the water and just kept going forward with his pressure in what ultimately won the fight with his very successful third round. And being that Rob Font chose to stay on this card, chose to take on a dangerous, surging prospect with no name value and compared to Dominic Cruz at least, in Gian Matsumoto, he deserves to fight someone with a ranking next. So in my opinion, why not do a rematch over 3 years in the making, at least by the time it would happen, between him and Marlon Chito Vera? Two guys on the outside looking in of title contention, but with a win or two could put themselves into title contention. Older veterans, but still have plenty left to give, not necessarily in their prime, but not in the twilight of their career either. It would be very fun stylistically, and a fight that would deliver for the fans. I see nothing wrong with that. If we look at what Rob Font has done, he lost that fight April 30th, 2022 via decision to Marlon Vera. Since then, he has had 5 fights, winning 3 and losing 2 of them. Marlon Vera has also had 5 fights, winning 2 and losing 3, and it just makes sense. Marlon Vera has fought for the title. He fought against Davis and Figueiredo. Now take a step back. 2 guys in the back half of the top 10, beginning of the top 15. Why not make it happen? I don't think Rob Font should have to take on another up-and-coming prospect, being that he literally just did it on short notice and won. And for Marlon Chito Vera, I guess you could say maybe he's the guy that should welcome or give the opportunity to someone newer in the rankings to take his spot. And if that's the case, I'm not going to bat an eye at it. But at first glance, first thing that came to mind in the aftermath of UFC Seattle, it's Rob Font versus Marlon Chito Vera 2. The Fighting Nerds takeover continues into 2025, and the first man to continue that momentum was John Silva, as he is now 4-0 in the UFC with 4 knockouts, and maybe none more devastating than this one here in the first round against Melsik Baghdasaryan. He sat him down with a nasty 1-2 combo where he just kind of waited for the referee to step in. The referee didn't step in, then he went in for the kill on the ground, even went to the body so he wouldn't deal more damage to the head of Melsik. This was just a vicious, nasty, ill-intention type of finishing combination that we saw here, and the potential is real. The ceiling is high for John Silva, who is now 15-2. He's 28 years old, so about to enter into his prime. He has 14 of his 15 victories by finish, 12 of those 14 by knockout. Hasn't lost a fight since April 21st of 2018. Meaning that he is on a 12-fight win streak over the last 7 years, had 3 fights in 2024 for the UFC, on pace to probably get 3 in 2025, and if this guy isn't facing a ranked featherweight in his next fight, us MMA fans have to riot. And I'm not going to lie, he had a pretty good call out in the aftermath, and that was Bryce Mitchell, Thug Nasty, who currently sits at number 13. And I'm not even going to get in or touch on the drama that surrounds Bryce Mitchell right now and his career and out of cage life. You all know what it is, and if you don't, feel free to research it on your own time. I'm not talking about all that stuff on here. I'm talking about fights and storylines. But in terms of his in-cage skills, he is coming off of a huge win in his most recent bout against Kron Gracie. He has a ranking next to his name at number 13. John Silva is looking to crack into the rankings, and it's a clash of styles. The dangerous, lethal striking of John Silva, the insane, slick grappling and jiu-jitsu of Bryce Mitchell. Put them together, something's got to give. That's the fight that you have to make if you're the UFC. Give John Silva what he called for. Bryce Mitchell even acknowledged it on X. And now we get into the prelims, and holy moly, there were 7 prelims on this UFC Seattle card. All 7 of them ended via finish. So first, the prelim headliner, Cutelaba versus Ibo Aslan, in a fight that was guaranteed to be a banger and not last very long. We actually saw Cutelaba face early adversity in that fight and come back and get a first-round submission via arm triangle, and all of that happened in just 2 minutes and 51 seconds. Ibo Aslan has had 16 professional fights now, and not one time has he went to the judges' scorecards, and Cutelaba has, I believe, 6 times saw the scorecards out of 31 fights. And for the former top 15 light heavyweight, Cutelaba's won 3 of his last 4 bouts, and the only loss in that time frame was to Felipe Lins back in March of 2024. Could he find himself against a top 15 light heavyweight in his next fight? Melquizael Costa got the biggest win of his career by submitting the longtime UFC veteran Andre Fili 4 minutes and 30 seconds into their bout. He started his UFC career 0-1, but his debut was against Thiago Moises back in January of 2023. Since then has won 3 of his last 4 bouts, with the only other loss coming to Steve Garcia, and that man is on a rampage right now at featherweight. And 2 of the 3 UFC victories for Costa both have been by submission, back-to-back now. 28 years old, 22-7 overall, finished 15 of his 22 victories, been finished in 4 out of his 7 losses. This man is much-watched TV. He is a kill-or-be-killed style of fighter, and as he begins to enter his prime, maybe he continues to put the pieces together, and before you know it, he could find himself against a ranked featherweight next. Mansur Abdul-Malik. Oh man, this guy just continues to build the aura around his career, as he is now 8-0 with a perfect record. All 8 victories are by way of finish, with 7 of them by knockout. He's only 27 years old, 6'2", long, rangy, powerful. That's the same way I described him on Friday. This dude is for real. He is a prospect to keep our eyes on in this middleweight division, but this victory over Nick Klein did not come without some adversity, because in that first round, he was stumbled and wobbled by a spinning back fist. However, he would shake the cobwebs off and ultimately get the TKO finish 3 minutes and 24 seconds into the second round, and what started that finishing combination was not some big looping hook or some insanely dangerous shot. It was just short, crisp punches that just carry so much power. The fact that he can cultivate this much power from not so much distance, doing this up against the fence, says all you need to know about the danger that he possesses in both of his hands. He was a Contender Series alum in 2024, made his debut less than 3 months after that Contender Series fight. Now he's 2-0 in the UFC, both with TKO finishes. Again, keep your eyes on this guy. He's a problem. War Ricky is back. The feel-good moment of the night for UFC Seattle as he gets the win in front of his home state and ends the 3-fight losing streak. The 32-year-old Simone improved to 21-6, so still a pretty great record, and he did so by knocking out Javid Basharat in the first round of their fight with a beautiful 1-2 set up by the left jab, came through with the right cross, landed flush, and put Javid to sleep. This was a massive bounce-back win for Simone, as he could not afford to have 4 consecutive losses. This is someone that in 2022 was in the rankings, main eventing a fight against Song Yadong in the spring of 2023, and I still believe in the potential of Ricky Simone. While he is toward the middle or maybe closer to the end of his prime years, he does have all of the skills to beat a lot of these ranked bantamweights, in my opinion. He's known for his grappling and wrestling, but fight by fight has continued to evolve on the feet, and it shows here with this brutal knockout. How about Mr. Van Zant himself making good on his 4-day short notice UFC debut, getting a finish over Nikolay Veretennikov. He hails from the Pacific Northwest, specifically Portland, Oregon, so it had to feel great getting a victory in front of the Washington crowd, as they got heavily involved in his victory, especially after Nikolay was upset with the stoppage and came over to Austin and shoved him in the aftermath of the fight. Come on, man. But Austin Vanderford made good on his nickname, the Gentleman, because he handled it with class. I mean, of course, yes, he did push Nikolay back, but he did get pushed first after all. But he was very well spoken in the post-fight interview with Michael Bisping, really laid out his plans, seemed very humble, not cocky, not overly confident. I was actually very impressed with this performance, which was very dominant up until the finish in the later half of that second round. And you pair that with his credentials in Bellator, where he had a very successful career. Yes, ended his streak there, losing 2 in a row, but they were against 2 of the best welterweights in the world in the Bellator specific promotion. A loss to Aaron Jeffrey and a loss to Gegard Mousasi in what was a title fight. And it was a great full circle moment because he was a 2018 alum from Dana White's Contender Series where he got a submission in the second round there, had to pay his dues in LFA, had to pay his dues in Bellator. Now he finds himself as a 1-0 UFC fighter. Nursulton Ruziboev improved to 3-1 in the UFC by disposing of his short-notice replacement opponent, Eric McConico. He finished him just 33 seconds into the second round, and as I said, 3-1 already in the UFC, all 3 victories by way of KO TKO. The only loss was to Joaquin Buckley in a fight that went the full 15 minutes, and we see where Joaquin Buckley is now. He's coming off of a main event win over Colby Covington. Ruziboev is only 31 years old, so he's right in his prime, has a plethora of experience, nearly 50 professional fights to his name, 35 victories, 33 of those wins are by way of stoppage. This man, you got to tune in when he fights. It's that simple. And last but not least, kicking off the night was Modestas Bukauskas, improving to 17-6 overall and 4-1 in the UFC since returning to his second stint. He did so by finishing Raffael Cerqueira in the first round with a nasty combination up against the fence where he would set him down via knockout. The Baltic Gladiator would finish his first stint in the UFC with 3 consecutive losses, and the last loss of that stretch was against Khalil Roundtree, who of course we know has went on to challenge Alex Pereira for a light heavyweight title, and in that fight, Khalil would severely injure Modestas' knee with a nasty oblique kick. That sidelined Modestas for nearly 14 months before he bounced back in November of 2022, where he would go 2-0 in Cage Warriors, get called back up to the UFC, and as I already mentioned, 4-1 since the return, and the lone loss was to Vitor Petrino via knockout. You have to give this man a ranked fighter in his next bout. He has more than earned it after coming back from that brutal injury, putting together a great resume during his second run in the promotion. You could put him against anyone in there, including Alonzo Minifield, who competed on this card, who sits at number 15. In my opinion, you could give him someone even as high as Johnny Walker at number 10, who has had to be pulled from his most recent bout. Regardless, Modestas has earned it, and what a story it would be if he can end up climbing his way into title contention in the next couple of years at 205 pounds. So that is it for the UFC Seattle recap. In the comments below, be sure to give me all of your biggest takeaways and your thoughts on all of the high-octane action the Pacific Northwest got to see. What do you make of the main event? What's next for Henry Cejudo? What's next for Song Yadong? And did that fight get handled properly in your opinion? And give me your matchmaking for all of the other big winners on this card as well. If you enjoyed this recap, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel, where every week I recap the most meaningful results from each card, I preview the biggest fights and best storylines heading into each card, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where podcast episodes are released there every Friday and Monday. Have a great week, and I will see you in the next video.